I'm here today with John Tonello. John is a former mayor of the city of Elmira, first elected to that seat in 2005. And John's written a book chronicling his experience and his path to that seat. What's up, man?
Hey Andy, great to see you, man.
You too, brother. Man, 20
2000
years ago, what the hell happened?
actually 21 years ago, and I was just a young whippersnapper. Um,
For the
you know,
inauguration, right? January of '06?
yeah, yeah. So that was 20 years ago, and it was
Right.
right about now that the front of the armory collapsed, uh,
Yeah.
and we went from there.
So let's talk about you've written the book, which is a great, easy read, and I'll put it back up on screen here. And also, just want to let people know it's available to purchase if you go to daringtorun.com. And it's a great primer for people that are thinking of running for office or maybe in the midst of running for office. And you're going to learn a lot from what John has shared. But, let's kind of talk right from the beginning. The subtitle for the book is How I Ran an Outsider's Campaign for Mayor of Elmira, New York, and Won. So, what prompted you to decide to run for mayor in 2005?
We'd come off of the national presidential election in 2004, which saw George W. Bush return to office. He beat John Kerry. And I had helped very little the congressional candidate that was running at the time, and she lost, Sam Barron. Um, and after that election, I was just kind of shocked and thought, I got to do more than that. But even before that, and I've told this story a lot, we had a crack house in our neighborhood. Uh, took up residence in an apartment flat, and people were descending on our neighborhood. They go in, smoke crack, leave, parking all over. It was just a bad scene. And our city councilman at the time put together a meeting with the mayor, city manager, police chief, and several neighbors and I got together with them at our councilman's house, and we didn't get any answers, and we were all like flummoxed and like, what just happened? So we walked away kind of dazed, and then we got angry, um, and that led me to be thinking more that the city's just not transparent. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on with the arena. I don't know what's going on with our crack house. I don't know the basis of these decisions. And I thought, when I talked to people like you, and they felt a similar frustration, and was able to tap into that because I didn't just sort of go, "Oh, I'm going to run." I was like, "Hey, neighbor, hey, folks I meet at Horrigan's, do you feel the same way?" And everybody's like, "Yeah, totally. I don't know what's going on." And of course, I have a communications background. I used to be a reporter, and I thought, that's the approach. Was I want to open up City Hall. I want everyone to know what's going on, and I want to bring that change to it. But I carried that element of anger, as you know, but it quickly became clear. I'm like, anger is not a campaign plan. You can't run on
Right.
anger. Yeah,
No.
everybody's mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore. Um, but you have to formulate a plan. Um, so I turn that anger into the positive. Got some great people. We joined the committee at the same time. For a lot of the same reasons. We came out of that 2004 election like, what just happened? I want to get engaged. But there was a feeling afoot, and I wasn't alone, and I wanted to be able to represent folks and do it a different way. And of course, it wasn't mayor that I was looking at initially; it was city council. Thought
Right.
that would be
Right.
a smaller hill to climb.
Right.
When circumstances changed and the seat was open, switched gears and went for it.
So as you began at least the conversations and meeting with other neighbors on this issue, and obviously, you know, talking with folks at Horgan's and around town, because obviously, you started thinking about, running. Maybe not mayoral at the beginning, but as you said, possibly city council. And you began to get a sense from folks that they weren't getting information from city government,
Right.
correct?
Just sort of universally, people were in the dark, and it wasn't that we necessarily disagreed 100% of the time. It wasn't like that. It was just that why is the city doing this? Okay, my taxes went up. I understand. There's inflation and health insurance costs go up. I get it, but what are the steps that are being taken? The I went back in time and looked at the planning for the arena, and you can see, the clouds on the horizon of like this probably is not going to turn out well. Um, and just the reasoning behind that, I understood the purpose, of bringing a facility like that and drawing new business and people downtown. But the whole funding structure was not very clear. There were some last minute things that were done. The college wasn't involved. They were, and then they weren't. And I'm like, what's going on with that? So almost everybody I talked to, casually, was just like, yeah, what's going on? Um, and when you have a real problem in your neighborhood, whether it's a crack house or a bad street, or trash not being picked, whatever, you need the city to step up and talk to you,
Right.
explain stuff, um, even when it's not on your, it might be disappointing news of why they can't do something, but explaining that, um, where are my tax dollars going? Why, what's going on? That was a universal feeling. People felt just it was a closed book.
So was there any reach out? I should say any successful back from anything successful coming back from the city council person at that time?
Bill Hopkins did a nice job in setting up the meeting, and uh, he was helpful in sort of facilitating, and he was concerned, and but from the mayor, the city manager, the police chief, we were like, wow, they weren't. It was clear they weren't going to act, and we had to wait for it to be condemned for it to go away, and the answers wasn't like, oh, we're overstaffed or stuff like that. I mean, that's part of the issue. I get it. The drug problem isn't just in my neighborhood, it's across the city. Um, but it was basically, yeah, when we get around to it, we'll take a look. I remember, we were like, you can use our house to stake this place out. We're right across the street.
I remember you telling me that. It's funny. Wow, yeah, right.
Like, what do you need? We're here to help. And my neighbors, Chrissy Brown, dear late neighbor of mine, um, we and I was with Bonnie Geswicki, who was my neighbor across the street, and her, I think most people know her husband, Ralph, a great guy. Um, we were just like, what's going on here? And we weren't just, people from a neighborhood coming out to complain. Chrissy was a mechanical engineer and built bridges for a living. Bonnie ran the Small Business Development Center in Corning. I was at the time working at Cornell. We weren't schlubs. We were, and we didn't raise our voices until the end of that meeting, because we were just like, you're not hearing us.
Right.
Um, and ultimately, when we started going door to door and listening to people, it was like same thing. Like I ask people, I don't get an answer. or I get subterfuge of some kind, not direct lies like you see today, but just like, you know, we got it. Um,
Right,
I'm like,
right.
no, I don't think you do.
We'll get back to you.
Yeah, on our
Yeah,
schedule.
yeah. On our schedule, right? We'll get back to you. So
Yeah,
that was you're moving forward into '05, and you're coming to the decision point of like, I'm just going to go for the mayoral position because I
yeah,
I think I have the right acumen and skills, and I can communicate, and there just needs to be a better way to do this. Um, so you were a registered Democrat, so you had to begin at least engage with the local committee. So you discuss in the book how you had some early challenges with your own committee. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What were some of those challenges?
yeah. And one of the things I thought was that, particularly in local government, this is the bastion of the average citizen. You don't need a political science degree. You don't need a bachelor's degree. You don't need, you bring your whatever your skill is, as whether you're a plumber or a professional, doesn't matter. You bring that to government. As I said, I was upset about the 2004 election and joined the committee after meeting Jim Hare at a hardware store, who invited me in, and he was always great at bringing in new blood.
Yeah.
Probably regretted that a little bit in the coming months, but I joined the committee. You were there. There were a bunch of people from all around the county representing all the counties, many of the towns, and of course the city. And immediately got the sense of like, glad you're here, glad you're part of the effort. But really, what you need to do is sit on the bench for a while, see, get the lay of the land, wait your turn. No one actually said wait your turn, not yet, later.
Yep.
And I remember you and I leaving that meeting, and it was a cold winter day, and just sort of going, that's not what I want to do. Like, I'm gung ho right now. I'm mad as hell. I think I have some ideas, and I don't want to do that. And then, and I was there was definitely some jockeying. There was stuff going on too with the city, with the mayor basically exiting, and then the city council, which was a 6-1 Democratic majority at the time, emerged when they announced that Hughes was leaving, that they were going to appoint Bill O'Brien as the interim, and that they had emerged with Dan Royal was going to be their candidate. And Dan was a three-term councilman.
A sitting member of council, right? Yep.
Yeah. Um, Decent guy, and but at the same time, I'm like, okay, I still am gonna run. Uh, because as nice a guy as Dan was, I was like, he's part of the crew that is not responding to the public. Um, and those there were some early meetings that are like, we don't want a primary. Let's figure it out. I remember Bill O'Brien as the interim mayor sitting at a meeting saying, "You guys need to solve this. We don't want a primary." And I always have a problem with that when people say no primary. Primaries are bad. You see it in national elections all the time. Like, I'm going to primary you. I'm like, I'm not going to do. I'll do what you say. I'm like, to me, a primary is your first and best opportunity to do the groundwork for the rest of the campaign. If you don't
Yep.
make it out of the primary, yeah, I get it. But if you're a good incumbent and you're doing the work of the people and representing them well, I don't think you're going to have a problem getting reelected,
Right.
or facing a primary challenger. But in this case, I was like, I don't think you're hearing what we're hearing, and I'm not going to get out of this. And Royal was interested, and Jim Hare for a time was interested, and then he dropped his bid and decided to run again for city council. Um, but there was a lot of animosity. I remember going to the meetings after that, and you get dirty looks, um, like you're not waiting your turn. And I remember talking. I took time to call all the committeemen and women in the city. Spent a lot of time doing that. And there were some that like, yeah, I'm all for you. Some were like, no, it's Dan's turn, and I'll support him. I like what you're saying, but it's his turn. I'm like, okay, that's even more encouraging. It did not discourage me, because I was just like, there's a split here in what they're representing and what I'm hearing that people want.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
so
there was entrenchment, and they would preach, let's build a better committee, let's bring in inclusion and bring in more folks, but we saw the opposite.
yeah, and there were a lot of good people there, and we
Sure.
did have allies. You know, people like Sharon Mitchell who had come back to the city, and there were several others that were like, yeah, we like this. We were all on the same page, but that was a small minority, and the day of the vote, they were going to endorse a candidate, and of course, we were saying don't endorse. There's going to be a primary, and I think they wanted to do that to sort of squash the chance of a primary. So
Right.
I announced on that day live on
Yeah.
TV, um, to just do a sort of punch in the mouth. And, we came into that meeting that night and it was a buzz. And we knew, I mean, we were hopeful that we'd get some votes, and we did. But I got trounced, and they ended up endorsing Royal. And I remember, and I think I put this in the book, Sharon turning to me, and she's like, "That's the last vote we're going to lose." Uh,
Right.
Meaning that you don't need this to get elected. And a lot of people who I think run for office, and you and I have seen this, Andy, get asked, invited to run. Even as mayor, I did that a couple times when we had vacancies. I would approach some people, and they would be like, "Oh, that's flattering," and I will be happy to do it. Um, where we were internally motivated. No one was asking us. In fact, they were doing the opposite. Like,
Right. Right.
don't do it. Um, and that process was eye-opening to go, oh, the committee doesn't know everything. Now the committee can give you a lot of arms and legs on the ground, right, to help with the mechanics. Um, but when it came to that, I was like, we're not on the same page. And this is not going to be helpful. And I'm not willing to sit here for years and let my sharp edges get worn off. Um, and, it's why prevent someone who has some ideas, any person, um, from stepping forward? Why would you, as a party, prevent that? Well,
Right.
sometimes there are people who don't have, I would say, the personality or the humility to carry it out because it takes that. It can't be about you. We read in a book once and we talked about this. There's only one reason people run for office. It's for love. Either you love yourself or you want to be loved by others. Um, but that idea of okay, just sitting back and waiting wasn't an option. And it was a tumultuous time. We were taking flack from all directions. And I think the Republicans are probably like, oh, this is awesome. Um,
Yeah,
and
they'll bury themselves. Right. Hmm.
Right. And that's why I say, this idea that primaries are bad. Well, if you go to a place like New York City, every office, including committeemen, which, in a county like Chemung and a place like Elmira, you want it, you're on. Those are primaried.
Right.
Like people are doing stuff. And if you're serious, you're not just invited and you think the committee is going to do the work for you. If you're really into it, you're going to have to give up something, many things to find the time to make that stuff happen. And
Right.
that and the primary gives you that opportunity to go start meeting people, talking up your game, talking about what you're going to do. Does it have any traction? Um, you know,
Modifying your game along the way. Yep. Sure.
yeah, which we did. One of the things that we
Yep.
found was that because we were using a database to find people to sign petitions to get on the ballot, we weren't going to the same old houses. And what did people say? Like, no one's ever come to my neighborhood,
Exactly.
in
Over and
years,
over.
right?
Yep.
Over and over. That became the core of the first television commercial that we did, first and only for the primary. Um, and it was a complete reflection of what we had learned over those months, getting, going from informal conversations to conversations with signers of petitions on their porches to marshaling people to vote. That whole process, the primary, if I hadn't run a primary, there's no way I would have won.
Correct.
It gave me
Right.
the visibility, gave me, um, confidence actually, because I'm like, do other people really think this? Is it just us? Are we crazy? Like, no, I'm not crazy. Everybody's saying the same things that we're thinking. So the
And I
primary,
think we've and
yeah,
I think we found out that it's evident, waiting to get asked, sitting in the back. Um, the committee um, didn't really help people outside of maybe near the end. Um, encouraging people to join is one thing, but helping them to determine how to run is another thing. I think we saw, I think your campaign, I know for myself, since I was involved and then ran myself, broke some old bad, call them bad habits, old ways.
mhm,
Um, going, we've talked about this ad nauseum over the years. Going to
yeah,
the same doors every election cycle to get the same signatures is
right,
a method, is a path to
fair,
disaster.
yeah,
Failure.
and that, and we. Mary Odell was the Board of Elections Democratic representative there, and she would give us the sheets, everybody would use to get petitions signed. And early on, we're like, God, these things are a tangle. And we had, because we didn't have the party members going door to door with us, that was one of the caveats, right? Dan Royal got 700 signatures from other committee members, and I got eight or something like that. Uh, not not
Maybe
800, eight.
eight,
Um,
less than 10.
right, like the committee can really help you with that and getting on the ballot. But that process was broken, and it developed that database so we could find where is the high concentration. So when I go to a street, I can hit 10 houses, not two over the course of 5 blocks. um, and that random but data centric model brought us all over the city into places that were ideal for meeting all different folks, all different Democrats at that point that told us the same thing. No one's been over here. And,
And that was a vote. That was a vote. That was a signature on a petition, but that was also a vote of, I mean, that was a vote of support. No
yeah,
question. When you
and
when you would hear that.
yeah, and we honed I would, it sounds, you know, like stereotypical, but I would stand on those porches and listen to what people, I would say, what do you think needs to be fixed? What's broken? What would you like to see? Um, that was just all research, right? Like,
Right.
I never cut people off. Some people wanted to invite me in and, I won't say talk my ear off, but I sat with people for half hour, 45 minutes. And are you done asking? Great. Now I'll leave. I'm not going to scurry off, even
Sure.
though the sun is setting and we have signatures, you have numbers to get. But I was like, that paid off too,
Yep.
because it was part and parcel of this is how, if I ever get elected, this is how I want to do the job. I want to listen to
Yep.
people, have a real conversation, look them in the eye. Um, and I was telling some folks earlier, I never made promises during that period either. That's not my style. But also, a promise is something that you're likely going to have to break. Now, that doesn't mean I'd say I totally agree with you, and I'm going to work as hard as I can to make that happen. I'm going to try on your behalf, and if possible, I'm going to get you involved in that
Right.
because we did do that later. We brought in a lot of those people that we met early on.
Well, and that's the natural. I mean, you and I have over the years, worked with people that have wanted to run or given advice or guidance. Um, but that's the core of that would is going to be the core of the job if you win. You're listening, you're communicating, right? Um, you're answering their questions. They've never had anybody come to the door, so the natural extension is I'm there at the door, I'm going to listen. I'm gonna give them all the time that needs to be given.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, you
It-
know, I'm gonna make up time on other
yeah,
doors because there's gonna be a number of doors nobody's gonna answer, right?
that's right. And that listening piece, and later we turned that into the campaign. I said, the mayor's number one job is to communicate, and what better than a professional communicator? I did that for a lot of years in my career.
Right,
Um, but I meant it as it's both ways. You're not just like, here's what we're doing. I'm standing in the tower of City Hall and shouting. Um, no, I want to hear it. Communication is two ways. Um, and those folks, some of the people I met earliest on who were very gracious, you know, and I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't like some super outgoing person who wanted to knock on hundreds of doors. And people were gracious in that process. And some of those earliest people I met were people that I put on boards, asked to be on ad hoc things. I remember later when I was mayor and there was problems with the dog park planning, uh, someone who came to the meeting complaining, I said, I want you on this board. You're not an insane person. You're a concerned neighbor with some good thoughts. Um, that concept of I want people at the table who are seeing these things for real every day in their lives. Um, Having your elected official listen to you is the lowest bar to me, right? And I know you felt the same, and people will come at you with a lot of stuff. Um, you know, Not getting defensive on those things. And of course, I wasn't running as an incumbent. I didn't have the baggage of that stuff. But at the same time, people would be like, there's this person I can't stand, and there's this, and that, letting them get that out and then settling on the conversations of how would you fix that? If I was in there representing you, how would you want me to do this on your behalf? Would you be willing to be involved? And it's okay if you
right,
don't, you know, um,
right.
but you're going to be part of it one way or another. Um, and I'm just going to be able to be there driving some of the wheels.